She pulled out a $5 bill and smiled. He didn't move. The CEO of Etheltech had a problem, a beat-up truck in her reserved spot. She assumed he was a nobody and offered him $5 to move it. When he stepped out and spoke, the color drained from her face. She pulled out a $5 bill and smiled. He didn't move. The $5 bill hung between them like a flag of surrender that neither of them had agreed to. Victoria Chen's smile was polished, the kind of smile she used on investors who asked stupid questions and on waiters who brought the wrong wine. It was a smile that had never been refused. Ethan Caldwell looked at the bill. Then he looked at her. His pale gray eyes were steady behind the thin gold frames of his wire-rimmed glasses, and his hands remained crossed over his chest. The dented stainless steel thermos clipped to his belt loop caught the morning light. He did not reach for the money. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had never actually been sorry in her life. "This is my reserved spot. I need you to move your truck." She held the bill out a little further, as if proximity would solve the problem. The $5 bill fluttered in the breeze from the parking lot, a tiny green bird trying to take flight. Ethan uncrossed his arms slowly. He reached up with his right hand and adjusted his glasses, the silver wedding band on his left ring finger catching the sun for just a moment. Then he spoke. "My name is Ethan Caldwell." The words landed like stones in still water. Victoria's smile did not disappear so much as it froze, a photograph of itself, the edges going stiff. Her hand lowered the $5 bill by exactly 2 inches. "I'm here for a meeting with the board of directors," Ethan said. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had learned that speaking softly meant people had to lean in to hear him. "They asked me to come." Victoria's laugh was small and brittle, a champagne glass dropped on marble. "The board? You!" She looked him up and down, her gaze traveling from the worn navy blue mechanic's coveralls to the scuffed black steel-toed work boots, from the embroidered patch reading Parker's Garage to the faded gray t-shirt at his collar. "I think there's been a mistake." "There hasn't been." She laughed again, louder this time, and a security guard near the entrance turned his head. "Listen," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I don't know who put you up to this, but I don't have time for games. Take the $5. Move the truck. We'll pretend this never happened." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the $5 bill. He folded it once, then twice, and slipped it into the breast pocket of his coveralls. "Thank you," he said, and he walked past her toward the building. The glass doors of Etheltech's headquarters slid open, and Ethan stepped into a lobby of polished concrete and brushed steel. A receptionist behind a curved desk looked up, her eyes catching on his coveralls before they reached his face. He saw the calculation happen in real time. Maintenance, delivery, maybe a vendor, not someone who belonged here. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "Ethan Caldwell. I'm here for the board meeting." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, paused, typed again. "I don't see you on the list." Behind him, the glass doors slid open again, and Victoria swept through, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown. "He's not on the list," she said, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Because he doesn't belong here." The receptionist's eyes darted between them. A few people in the lobby had stopped to watch, their coffee cups paused halfway to their lips. Call Margaret Chen, Ethan said quietly. She'll confirm. Victoria's laugh was sharper now, a blade. Margaret, the board secretary? You think Margaret Chen is going to vouch for a mechanic who wandered in off the street? Ethan did not answer. He simply stood there, his hands in the pockets of his coveralls, his weight shifted to one foot, waiting. The receptionist hesitated. Victoria's smile returned, wider now, triumphant. "Security!" she called, her voice carrying across the lobby. "We have a situation." Two security guards in navy uniforms approached, their hands resting on their belts. The taller one, a man with a gray mustache and tired eyes, looked at Ethan and sighed. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ethan reached into the pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. He held it up. "This was delivered to my house yesterday. It's a letter from the board chairman. It says, and I quote, 'Your presence is requested at the emergency board meeting on Thursday, 8 a.m. sharp. Your expertise in medical device regulation is critical to the future of this company.'" The security guard took the envelope, read it, and his face changed. He handed it back to Ethan and turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, this looks legitimate." Victoria's smile cracked. "That's a forgery. That's..." The elevator doors opened. A woman stepped out. She was small and soft-bodied, with silver-gray hair tied in a low bun and a cream-colored cable-knit cardigan over a white blouse. A worn leather journal with a brass clasp was tucked under her arm. She was 62 years old and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years running things that other people only thought they were running. "Margaret," Victoria said, relief flooding her voice. "Tell them, this man is not on the list." Margaret Chen did not look at Victoria. She looked at Ethan, and her dark brown eyes softened. She had been at the estate the night Sarah died. She had held Leo while Ethan made the phone calls. She had watched him sell everything and walk away from a life that most people would have killed for, all because a 7-year-old boy needed his father home by 3 o'clock. "Ethan," she said, her voice warm and steady, "the board is ready for you." Victoria's mouth opened and closed. The security guards stepped aside. The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard, motionless. Ethan walked past Victoria toward the elevator. As he passed Margaret, she fell into step beside him, her leather journal pressed against her chest. "Margaret," Victoria said, her voice rising. "Margaret, what is this?" Margaret Chen turned. She pulled the leather journal from under her arm and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Her eyes scanned the notes she had written 4 years ago, the day Ethan had resigned from his own company, the day he had told her that some things mattered more than money. "It's time," she said. The elevator doors closed. 4 years earlier, the clock on the wall had read 3:17 a.m. when Sarah Caldwell stopped breathing. Ethan had been holding her hand, his thumb pressed against her pulse point, counting the beats, because counting was something he could do, something his engineer's brain understood. 1, 2, 3, 4. The beats had slowed. Then they had stopped. The doctors said it was a sudden cardiac event. They used words like unexpected and rare, and there was nothing we could have done. Ethan had listened to all of them, his pale gray eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond their shoulders. And he had not said a word. He had walked out of the hospital with Leo's small hand in his, the boy's pulse warm and steady against his palm. and he had driven home to a house that felt like a photograph of itself. Leo was 7 years old. He had his mother's dark hair and her quiet way of watching the world. That night, he had asked if his mother was coming back. Ethan had said no, and Leo had nodded, and then he had asked if they could still have pancakes on Saturday. Ethan had made pancakes. He had burned the first batch and started over. That was the moment he decided to sell his majority stake in the medical device company he had built with Sarah, the company that had made them both rich beyond anything they had ever imagined. He sold it in 3 weeks. He took a job at Parker's garage because the owner, an old man named Ray Parker, let him set his own hours, and because the garage was 8 minutes from Leo's school. He told no one who he had been. He let the coveralls and the thermos and the scuffed boots become his new skin. He picked Leo up every day at 3 p.m. He made dinner. He read bedtime stories. He fixed cars and thought about patents and waited for the world to forget that Ethan Caldwell had ever been anyone at all. Then the cream envelope with embossed gold arrived, and Margaret Chen had called. And now he was standing in an elevator, rising toward a boardroom full of people who had no idea what they were about to ask him to do. The doors opened onto the executive floor. A woman in a sharp blazer stood at the reception desk, her hand already raised to block him. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't." Margaret stepped past her and opened the door to the conference room. The board members were already seated, their faces turned toward the entrance, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Gentlemen," Margaret said, "this is Ethan Caldwell." And the room went silent. Margaret Chen pulled the leather journal from under her arm and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "It's time," she said. The words hung in the corridor like a held breath. Victoria Chen's heels had stopped clicking against the marble floor. Her hand, the one that had been reaching for her phone to call security, hovered in midair. "Margaret," Victoria said, her voice carrying the polished edge of someone used to being obeyed. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Margaret didn't look at her. Her dark brown eyes, kind and alert, remained fixed on Ethan. The silver-gray hair in its low bun caught the fluorescent light as she stepped aside, one hand gesturing toward the open conference room door. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and chrome. A table of dark polished wood stretched 40 feet, surrounded by 12 leather chairs. 7 of them were occupied. Men and women in suits that cost more than Ethan's truck turned to watch him enter. Their gazes moved from his worn coveralls to his scuffed boots to the faded gray t-shirt at his collar. Then, one by one, they looked at his face. The chairman stood. He was 73 years old, white-haired, with the weathered face of a man who had spent 40 years in boardrooms and had learned to read people in the first 5 seconds. His name was Harold Finch, and he had built EthelTech from a startup in his garage to a company worth $400 million. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Thank you for coming." Ethan took his hand. The grip was firm, measured. He didn't squeeze harder than necessary. "Harold," he said, "your letter said it was urgent." Victoria stepped into the room behind him. Her jaw was tight enough that the muscles in her neck stood out. "Harold, I need an explanation." This man," Harold said, cutting her off with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise his voice. holds 7 patents in medical device regulation. He built a company that was acquired for $230 million. And he is the only person in this room who can save this company. The silence that followed was the kind that settles into a room like dust. Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Ethan walked to the empty chair at the center of the table and sat down. He unclipped the dented stainless steel thermos from his belt loop, unscrewed the cap, and took a slow sip of black coffee. The gesture was so deliberate, so unhurried, that everyone in the room found themselves watching the steam rise from the rim. "Gentlemen," he said, setting the thermos down. "Ladies, I've reviewed your situation." He pulled a small notebook from his back pocket. It was spiral-bound, the cover worn soft from years of use, the pages filled with handwriting that was small and precise. He opened it to a page marked with a paperclip. "Your Helios project," he said. "The portable dialysis unit. You launched it 6 months ago without proper FDA clearance for the new filtration membrane. You've had 3 adverse event reports. The FDA has issued a warning letter, and your stock has dropped 42% in the last quarter." He looked up. His pale gray eyes moved from face to face, pausing just long enough on each person to let them feel the weight of his attention. "You don't need a consultant," he said. "You need someone who understands the regulatory pathway for a Class 3 medical device. Someone who has done it before. Someone who knows that the filtration membrane you're using was originally developed for a different application, and that there are 3 alternative materials that would pass FDA review in 8 weeks instead of 18 months. Harold Finch was smiling. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. "And you've already identified those alternatives," he said. It wasn't a question. Ethan slid a folded document across the table. "Specifications, supplier contracts, and a timeline. I prepared it before I came." Victoria stepped forward, her hands flat on the table. "This is absurd. You're a mechanic. You fix cars. You don't get to walk in here and—" "I fix things," Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "That's what I do. I fix things that are broken. Sometimes it's an engine. Sometimes it's a company. Sometimes it's a filtration membrane that was never tested for the application you're using it for." He turned back to Harold. "My terms are simple. Full control of the product division. A team of my choosing, and Victoria's resignation." The room went still. Victoria's face drained of color, then flushed red. "You can't be serious. Harold, you can't—" "The board has already voted," Harold said. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on Ethan. "Unanimously. Victoria, your severance package has been prepared. Security will escort you out." Victoria's hand went to her throat. The diamond stud earrings caught the light as she shook her head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream. "You're firing me. For him. For a man in coveralls who drives a truck from 1998. "He's the man who holds the patent you need," Harold said. "And the man who identified your embezzlement. We have the documentation. We were waiting for the right moment." The word embezzlement landed like a stone in still water. Victoria's composure cracked. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin, always lifted, now trembled. "That's not—" she started. "It is," Ethan said. He took another sip of coffee. $217,000, transferred to a shell company registered in your brother's name. I found it in the first hour of reviewing your financials." Victoria's eyes met his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she turned and walked out of the room. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step slower than the last, until the sound faded into silence. Ethan sat alone in the boardroom for a long time after the others left. He finished his coffee. He closed his notebook. He looked out the window at the city below, the glass towers catching the morning light, and thought about a different building, a different time, a different life. He drove home in the gray pickup truck, the $5 bill still in his pocket, and thought about what Sarah would have said. "You fixed something," she would have whispered, "but you fixed it the right way." He opened the door to Leo's room and found him asleep, clutching a small stuffed bear that Sarah had sewn for him the year she died. He sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. Ethan opened the door to Leo's room and found him asleep, clutching a small stuffed bear that Sarah had sewn for him the year she died. He sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. The bear was threadbare now, its left ear reattached 3 times, the stitching uneven but precise. Sarah's hands had been steady, even in those last weeks. Ethan reached out and touched the bear's paw, felt the worn fabric, the place where his son's fingers had held it through every nightmare, every doctor's appointment, every night his father had come home late with grease under his nails and the smell of the garage still on his skin. Leo stirred, pulled the bear closer, and Ethan didn't move. He sat in the dark and watched his son breathe. The clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. He had been sitting there for 43 minutes. The next morning, Ethan arrived at EthelTech at 7:15, the gray pickup truck pulling into a visitor spot because he didn't have a badge yet. Margaret Chen was waiting in the lobby, her silver hair pulled back, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. "Black, no sugar," she said, handing him one. Ethan took it. "How did you know?" "Your thermos. You refill it 3 times a day from the gas station on Maple. That's not a preference. That's a habit." She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "I pay attention." He followed her through the security turnstiles, past the receptionist who had watched Victoria's dismissal, past the elevators that led to the executive floor. Margaret led him to a small office on the 3rd floor. Windowless, furnished with a metal desk and a filing cabinet that listed slightly to the left. "Your team is down the hall," she said. 6 engineers, 3 designers, 2 regulatory specialists. Victoria reassigned them to other projects yesterday afternoon. Ethan set his coffee on the desk. "Reassign them back." "I already did." Margaret pulled the leather journal from under her arm and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "I also took the liberty of pulling the personnel files for every engineer who's worked on a Class 2 medical device in the past 5 years. There are 17 who left EthelTech in the last 18 months. 4 of them are currently unemployed." The wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent light as Ethan looked up. "You've been planning this." "I've been watching," Margaret said. "There's a difference." She handed him a folder. Inside were resumes, phone numbers, and a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. "These people were pushed out. They know the product. They'll come back for you." Ethan read the note twice. Then he said, "Call them." He worked through the morning without looking up. The 6 engineers Margaret had reassigned found their way to his office one by one. A woman in her 30s with a prosthetic hand that she'd designed herself. A man in his 60s who carried a slide rule in his breast pocket. A kid who couldn't have been older than 25 with a tattoo of a circuit board on his forearm. Ethan listened to each of them. He asked questions, took notes in a small spiral notebook, and when the last one left, he had the shape of the problem in his head. The product was a continuous glucose monitor. Victoria had rushed it to market without completing the biocompatibility testing. The FDA had flagged it. The company had lost its certification. 200 employees were about to lose their jobs because one person had been in a hurry to hit her quarterly bonus. Ethan opened his notebook to a blank page and wrote, "Fix the monitor, save the certification, keep the people." Below that, he wrote, "Leo's pickup at 3 o'clock. At 2:45, he stood up. The kid with the circuit board tattoo looked up from his desk. "You leaving?" "My son gets out of school at 3:15. The kid nodded. "My dad did the same thing, every day." He didn't say anything else, but Ethan saw the look in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. He drove to the elementary school in the gray pickup. The coffee thermos clipped to his belt loop, the folder of resumes on the passenger seat. Leo was waiting by the flagpole, the stuffed bear tucked under his arm, a drawing in his other hand. "Dad, look!" He held up the drawing. A stick figure in blue coveralls standing next to a truck with the words, "My dad fixes things," written in crayon. Ethan knelt down and looked at it. "That's me." "Yep. Mrs. Patterson said we had to draw what our parents do. I said you fix things. She said that's a good job." Ethan's throat tightened. It is a good job. He drove home with Leo in the passenger seat, the drawing taped to the dashboard, the bear on Leo's lap. They stopped at the gas station on Maple, and Ethan bought Leo a hot dog and a Gatorade, and they sat on the tailgate of the truck and ate in the late afternoon sun. "You're not wearing your coveralls today," Leo said. "I had a meeting." "A meeting?" "Yeah, at a big building downtown." Leo considered this. Was it about fixing something? It was about fixing a lot of things. Leo nodded, satisfied, and went back to his hot dog. Ethan watched him and thought about the 17 engineers Margaret had identified, the 6 who had already come to his office, the 200 employees who didn't know yet that someone was working on their behalf. He thought about Sarah and what she would have said. "You're not just fixing the monitor, Ethan. You're fixing the whole system." He finished his coffee, clipped the thermos back to his belt, and drove Leo home. That night, after Leo was asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with the folder of resumes and his notebook. He made calls until 11 p.m. 4 engineers agreed to come back. 2 said they'd think about it. 1 told him to go to hell. He wrote down every name, every response, every note about what would need to happen next. At 11:47, he closed the notebook and walked to Leo's room. The bear was on the floor. He picked it up, tucked it back under Leo's arm, and stood in the doorway for a long moment. The house was quiet. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. Ethan walked back to the kitchen and opened his notebook again. On the last page, he wrote, "Day 1. Progress. 4 engineers. 1 prototype concept. 1 drawing from Leo." He closed the notebook and went to bed. The next morning, the kid with the circuit board tattoo was waiting outside his office. He had a coffee in each hand and a look on his face that Ethan hadn't seen before. "Boss," the kid said, "you need to see this." Ethan followed him to the engineering lab. The 6 engineers were gathered around a workbench, and on the bench was a prototype. Not the glucose monitor, but something else. Something smaller. Something that made Ethan stop walking. It was a sensor. A continuous heart rate monitor designed for pediatric patients, with a soft silicone casing that looked like it could be sewn into a stuffed animal. "We built it last night," the woman with the prosthetic hand said. "After you left, we figured if you're going to fix the company, you should know what we can do when someone trusts us." Ethan picked up the sensor. It was light, warm, the edges smooth. He turned it over in his hands and saw the inscription on the back. For Leo. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The kid with the circuit board tattoo said, "We're in, boss. All of us." Ethan looked at the sensor, then at the 6 engineers, then at the clock on the wall. It was 8:03 a.m. He had 11 hours until he picked up Leo. He had a company to save. He had a team that believed in him. He clipped the thermos to his belt, pulled out his notebook, and said, "Let's get to work." Victoria Chen sat alone in her office, the lights off, the city glittering below, and picked up her phone. She dialed a number she swore she'd never call again. Victoria Chen sat alone in her office, the lights off, the city glittering below, and picked up her phone. She dialed a number she swore she'd never call again. The line rang 3 times before a man's voice answered, low and unhurried. "Victoria, I need you," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled slightly against the glass of her desk. "They fired me. The board. They let a mechanic walk in and take everything." There was a pause on the other end. Her brother, Adrian Chen, was a partner at one of the most expensive law firms in the state. He had built his reputation on winning cases that looked unwinnable. He had also built it on never losing his composure. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. She did. She told him about the truck in her spot, the $5 bill, the way Ethan Caldwell had stepped out of that dusty gray Ford like he owned the building. She told him about the board meeting, the binder of notes, the patent he held like a loaded weapon. She did not tell him about the embezzlement. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "They have a paper trail?" "They have nothing," she said. "Just his word and a board that wanted me gone." "Then we sue," Adrian said. "Wrongful termination, defamation. We'll bury him in depositions until he can't remember which day of the week it is." Victoria smiled in the dark. "That's what I wanted to hear." She hung up and leaned back in her chair, the leather cold against her neck. The city lights blurred through the window. She had spent 18 years building this career. She had earned every corner office, every board seat, every speck of dust on this desk. And now, a man in mechanic's coveralls had walked in and taken it all in the time it took to read a memo. She would not let that stand. The cease and desist letter arrived at Ethan's house on a Tuesday morning, folded in a cream envelope with the law firm's embossed seal. He read it, standing in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other holding the paper. Coffee steamed in a mug beside him. Leo was at school. The house was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzz of a lawnmower 3 blocks away. He read the letter twice. Then he set it down, picked up his phone, and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. "Ethan, I need a lawyer," he said. "I already have one," Margaret said. Donna Reyes. She's the best in the state. I had her on retainer the day you walked into the boardroom. Ethan closed his eyes. Of course you did. She's expecting your call, Margaret said. And Ethan, she's not cheap. Neither am I, he said. Donna Reyes was a woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She met Ethan in her office, a corner room on the 23rd floor of a glass tower that overlooked the river. The walls were lined with framed verdicts and photos of her shaking hands with judges. She read the cease and desist letter in 30 seconds, then set it down and looked at him over her glasses. She's going to leak to the press, Donna said. Probably already has. By tomorrow, the story will be that a mechanic bullied his way into a CEO position and forced out a woman with 18 years of experience. Ethan nodded. What do? We prepare, she said. We file a countersuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we wait for her to make a mistake. She already has, Ethan said. Donna raised an eyebrow. Ethan reached into his coveralls and pulled out a manila envelope. He set it on the desk between them. This is everything I found in her office. Emails, bank statements, meeting notes. She's been embezzling for 2 years. Donna opened the envelope and began reading. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved faster. After a long silence, she looked up. Where did you get this? I made copies, Ethan said. I always make copies. Donna studied him for a moment, then nodded, slowly. You know, most people in your position would have walked away, taken the settlement. Let the lawyers handle it. Ethan shook his head. She put 200 employees at risk. She stole from a company that people trusted. I can't walk away from that. Then we don't, Donna said. She closed the envelope and set it in her briefcase. We go to trial. The press conference was held in a hotel ballroom 3 days later. Victoria stood at a podium, flanked by Adrian and a publicist. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and microphones. She read a prepared statement. Her voice was calm, measured, perfectly rehearsed. She spoke about her years of service, her dedication to Etheltech, and the betrayal she felt at being forced out by a man with no corporate experience. She did not mention the embezzlement. She did not mention the patent. The reporters ate it up. By that evening, the headlines were brutal. Mechanic ousts CEO in corporate coup. Boardroom betrayal, the mechanic who stole a company. Victoria Chen fights back against unjust termination. Ethan's phone rang constantly. He ignored it. He picked up Leo from the neighbor's house at 3 o'clock, as he always did. They walked home together, Leo's hand in his, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Daddy, why are there men with cameras outside our house? Leo asked. Ethan looked up. 3 news vans were parked across the street, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky. Because some people don't understand what's true, Ethan said. He squeezed Leo's hand. But you and I know the truth, don't we? Leo nodded. You fixed something. That's right, Ethan said. I fixed something. The trial was set for 6 months later. Victoria's brother tried to negotiate a settlement, but Victoria refused. She wanted to see Ethan in court. She wanted to watch him try to explain to a jury why a mechanic deserved to run a medical device company. Donna prepared relentlessly. She deposed every board member, every employee, every witness who had ever crossed paths with Victoria Chen. She built a case so thorough that even Ethan, who had seen the evidence, was surprised by its weight. The day before the trial, an anonymous letter arrived at Ethan's house. It was in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph: Victoria Chen sitting in a restaurant with the CEO of EagleTech's biggest rival, a man in a gray suit with cold eyes. They were leaning across a table, papers spread between them, and Victoria was smiling. Ethan stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he put it in his pocket and called Donna. "Something came in the mail," he said. "What is it?" "A photo of Victoria with the CEO of her rival company. They're planning something." Donna was silent for a moment. "That's enough to end her." "I know," Ethan said, "but I want to do this the right way. No tricks, no last-minute surprises. I want the jury to see the truth." Donna sighed. "You're a better man than most, Ethan Caldwell." "I'm just a mechanic," he said. "I fix things." The morning of the trial, Ethan woke early. He made coffee, packed Leo's lunch, and drove him to school. Leo hugged him tighter than usual. "Will you be home for dinner?" Leo asked. "I'll be home for dinner," Ethan said. "I promise." He drove to the courthouse in his gray pickup truck, the dented thermos clipped to his belt loop. The parking lot was full of news vans. Reporters shouted his name as he walked toward the entrance. He didn't stop. The courtroom was packed. Victoria sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Adrian and a team of lawyers. She looked composed, her chin lifted, her eyes cold. Ethan took his seat at the plaintiff's table beside Donna. He folded his hands on the wood and waited. The judge entered. The bailiff called the court to order, and the trial began. The front door of EagleTech's headquarters swung open, and a man in a gray suit stepped out, flanked by two lawyers. He looked directly at Ethan, who was waiting in the parking lot beside his truck. The man's name was Marcus Webb, CEO of NextGen Medical, and he had been watching the trial from the gallery every day, sitting in the back row, his face unreadable. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of boardroom battles. His lawyers were younger, sharper, their eyes scanning the parking lot like they expected cameras behind every parked car. Ethan did not move. He stood beside the gray pickup, the dented stainless steel thermos clipped to his belt loop, his hands in the pockets of his worn coveralls. The morning sun caught the gold frames of his wire-rimmed glasses. He watched Marcus Webb walk toward him. Webb stopped 10 feet away. His lawyers hung back, their hands clasped in front of them, their faces betraying nothing. "Ethan Caldwell," Webb said. "Not a question." Ethan nodded. "I came to offer you a settlement," Webb said. "Drop the countersuit. I'll make Victoria go away. Permanently." Ethan's pale gray eyes did not blink. "She's already going away. The jury saw the evidence." Webb smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind that had closed 1,000 deals. "The jury saw what your lawyer showed them, but Victoria has connections. She knows people. She's not done. Neither am I." Webb's smile faded. He studied Ethan for a long moment, his eyes traveling from the worn coveralls to the scuffed boots to the thermos on his belt. "You're a difficult man to read, Caldwell." "That's the point." Webb took a step closer. His voice dropped. "Victoria is planning something. I don't know what, but she's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. You have a son, don't you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The small pulse in Leo's wrist, the stuffed bear Sarah had sewn, the blue nightlight down the hall, all of it compressed into a single thought that passed behind his eyes like a cloud. "You have no idea what I have," Ethan said. Webb held up his hands, a gesture of surrender. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. Take the settlement. Let her disappear. Go back to your life. Ethan pulled his hands from his pockets and crossed his arms over his chest. My life is exactly where I want it. And I don't make deals with people who wait in the back row. Webb's face hardened. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or the recognition of a man who could not be bought. Then he turned and walked back to his lawyers. They climbed into a black sedan and drove away without looking back. Ethan watched them go. Then he climbed into the pickup and drove home. The trial resumed the next morning. Victoria's lawyer put on a show. Charts, timelines, a parade of witnesses who described Ethan as a vengeful ex-employee who had manipulated the board. The lawyer's voice rose and fell like a conductor's baton, painting a picture of a man who had destroyed a career out of spite. Ethan's lawyer, Donna Reyes, did not rise to argue. She sat at the defense table, her hands folded on a yellow legal pad, her face impassive. She was a small woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and glasses that perched on the end of her nose. She had defended Ethan Caldwell for 15 years, from the early patent disputes to the sale of his company, and she knew that the best arguments were the ones that did not need to be shouted. When it was her turn, she called Ethan to the stand. He walked to the witness box in his mechanic's coveralls, the same coveralls he had worn every day of the trial. The bailiff swore him in. He sat down, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze steady. Donna approached the stand. Mr. Caldwell, could you tell the jury why you left your position as CEO of your medical device company? Ethan was silent for a moment. The courtroom was still. The jury leaning forward, the reporters in the back row holding their breath. Victoria's lawyer shifting in his seat. My wife died, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to the farthest corner of the room. Her name was Sarah. She was a teacher. She was 34 years old. She died of a pulmonary embolism on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:47 p.m. I was in a meeting when it happened. I didn't get to say goodbye. He paused. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. After she died, I had a 7-year-old son named Leo. He was the only thing that mattered. I sold my company because I needed to be home by 3 o'clock every day. I took a job as a mechanic because it let me pick him up from school. I wore these coveralls because they were comfortable and because nobody in a boardroom ever asked me what I was doing in them. He looked at the jury. His pale gray eyes were dry, but there was something in them that made the foreman look away. I didn't come back to Etheltech to take anyone's job. I came back because the board asked me to. I came back because 200 families depended on that company. And I came back because I made a promise to my wife the night she died, that I would never stop fixing things that were broken. Donna nodded. She turned to the jury. No further questions. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Ethan spent those days at home, teaching Leo how to fix an old lawnmower in the backyard. The boy was 9 now, tall for his age, with his mother's dark hair and his father's steady hands. He held the wrench the way Ethan did, carefully, deliberately, as if every turn mattered. Dad, Leo said, why did you go back to that place? Ethan knelt beside him. Because sometimes you have to fix things that don't belong to you. Is that what Mom would have wanted? Ethan looked at the half-disassembled lawnmower. the scattered bolts on the grass, the blue sky above them. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what she would have wanted. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Victoria was found guilty of defamation and attempted theft of intellectual property. The judge ordered her to pay damages and barred her from holding a corporate position for 5 years. She did not look at Ethan as she was led out of the courtroom. Ethan walked out of the courthouse into a swarm of cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping like waves. He did not stop. He did not speak. He walked to the gray pickup truck, climbed in, and drove home. The $5 bill was still in his pocket. He had not spent it. He did not know why. He pulled into the driveway of the small house in the modest neighborhood, the house with the blue nightlight in the window, the house where Sarah's coat still hung on the hook by the door. He sat in the truck for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the afternoon light slanting through the windshield. Then he thought about what Sarah would have said. "You fixed something," she would have whispered, "but you fixed it the right way." He smiled. It was a small smile, barely a movement of his lips, but it was there. He got out of the truck and walked inside to his son.